The first time I heard my father beg, I was pressed between two men who smelled like leather and summer dust, and the word please coming from his mouth didn't sound like mercy. It sounded like surrender. I didn't know their names yet. I only knew they were giants, identical twins with shoulders that blocked out the sun, and when they'd walked onto our failing farm that morning, my father's face had gone white as creek stones. Now he stood 10 feet away, hat literally in his hands, and I could see his fingers trembling around the brim. "Please," he said again, and the shame in his voice made my chest tight. "Don't take him, take anything else." The twin on my left, the one with a small scar through his eyebrow, shifted his weight, and I felt the movement like an earthquake. They weren't touching me, not exactly, but they stood so close I could feel the heat radiating off their bodies. The one on my right had eyes the color of creek water in October, and when he looked down at me, something in my stomach dropped like a stone into a well. "Your daddy owes us money, sweetheart," Scar Eyebrow said, his voice honey slow and devastating. "3 months' worth, and we don't take anything else. We take what's valuable." "My son isn't collateral," my father said, but his voice cracked. We both knew he was lying. Everything on this farm was collateral now. The land, the house, the rusted truck, me. Creek Eyes knelt down slightly, not to my level because even crouching he was still taller than me, but enough that I had to look directly into his face. Up close, I could see the gold flecks in his irises, the way his jaw was sharp enough to cut glass, the faint stubble that shadowed his skin. "What's your name?" he asked, and his voice was different from his brother's, softer, almost gentle. "Eli," I whispered, because my voice had abandoned me somewhere around the time they'd stepped out of their black truck. "Eli," he repeated like he was tasting it. "Pretty name, you scared of us, Eli." I should have said yes. I should have nodded, played the victim, made them feel like monsters. Instead, I said, "Should I be?" Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe or amusement, and his brother laughed, a sound like rolling thunder. "Oh, I like this one, Cameron. He's got spine." Cameron, so that was Creek Eye's name, and that meant Scar Eyebrow was, what? I didn't have time to wonder because Cameron stood up and suddenly the air changed, got heavier, more dangerous. "Here's how this works," Cameron said, directing his words at my father but never taking his eyes off me. "Your boy comes with us for the summer, works off what you owe. 3 months dawn to dusk, whatever we need done at our ranch. He does good work, keeps his head down, we call it even. He tries to run or you try to interfere." He paused, let the threat hang in the air like smoke. "Well, then we take the farm." My father made a sound like a wounded animal. "He's just 19. He doesn't know ranch work. He's standing right here," I interrupted, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "And he can speak for himself." Both twins looked at me then, really looked, and I felt stripped down to bone and nerve. Scar Eyebrow smiled slowly. "Oh, I really like this one." "Eli, no," my father started, but I cut him off. "3 months," I asked Cameron, "that's all?" "That's all," he confirmed. "And you won't take the farm, won't come after my father again?" "We're men of our words, sweetheart. You work hard, we forgive the debt. Simple as that." Nothing in his tone suggested it would be simple. Nothing about the way he looked at me, like I was a puzzle he wanted to solve or a horse he wanted to break, suggested this summer would be anything close to easy. But my father's hands were still shaking, and the farm that had been in our family for 4 generations was 2 months away from foreclosure, and I didn't see another choice. "Okay," I said, "I'll go." "Eli, please." My father stepped forward, and both twins moved simultaneously, placing themselves between us like a wall of muscle and warning. "He made his choice," Scar Eyebrow said. "Respect it." 15 minutes later, I was in the cab of their truck with a duffel bag of clothes, and my father's broken expression burned into my memory. Cameron drove, one hand loose on the wheel, the other resting on his thigh. His brother, I still didn't know his name, sat in the middle, so close our shoulders touched every time the truck hit a bump. "I'm Wyatt," he said after a few miles of silence, since nobody bothered with introductions. Wyatt and Cameron, I repeated. The Nelson twins, I've heard of you. Nothing good, I bet, Wyatt said with a grin that should have scared me but somehow didn't. No, I admitted, nothing good. Cameron's jaw tightened slightly, and I saw his knuckles flex on the steering wheel. Don't believe everything you hear in town, Eli. People like to talk. They say you buy up failing farms, I said, testing the waters. That you circle like vultures, waiting for people to drown, then you swoop in and take everything. The silence that followed was heavy enough to suffocate in. Then Wyatt laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Is that what they say, that we're vultures? Among other things. Cameron glanced at me and there was something fierce in his eyes, something almost hurt. And you believe them. I thought about the way my father had begged, about the casual cruelty of their arrival, the way they'd stood over me like I was theirs to take. But I also thought about Cameron kneeling down to ask my name, about the way he'd said pretty like he meant it, about how Wyatt had called me spine instead of scared. I don't know what I believe yet, I said honestly. Wyatt's hand landed on my knee, just a brief touch there and gone, but it burned through my jeans like a brand. Honest, he murmured. I like that. Don't lose that, Eli. And as the truck ate up miles of dusty road, carrying me away from everything I knew towards something I couldn't begin to imagine, I realized with crystalline clarity that the most dangerous thing about these men wasn't their size or their reputation. It was the way they made me feel like maybe I wanted to be taken. The Nelson Ranch sprawled across the horizon like something out of an old western, all weathered wood and endless fence lines, with mountains purple in the distance and skies so big it made you feel small. The house itself was massive, 2 stories of dark timber and stone, surrounded by barns and outbuildings that looked like they'd been there forever. Home sweet home, Wyatt said as Cameron parked the truck near the main house. What do you think, city boy? I'm not from the city, I pointed out. I'm from a farm. A failing farm, Cameron corrected, and though his tone wasn't cruel, the words still stung. They showed me to a room on the 2nd floor, small but clean, with a window that overlooked the horse pastures. There was a bed, a dresser, a chair. Nothing fancy, but more space than I'd had back home where I'd shared a room with my younger brother until he'd left for college. Bathrooms across the hall, Cameron said from the doorway. Dinner's at 6. You'll meet the others then. Others? We've got 3 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse. Couple guys from town who come in during the day. You'll work with all of them at some point. He paused, leaned against the doorframe in a way that made his shirt pull tight across his chest. But you answer to us. Clear. Crystal, I said, trying not to stare at the way the evening light caught in his hair. He studied me for a long moment, and I had the unsettling feeling he could see right through me, past the false bravado and defensive posture to the scared kid underneath, who had no idea what he'd just agreed to. You did a good thing today, Cameron said quietly, taking this on yourself. Your daddy's a lucky man. He's a desperate man, I corrected. There's a difference. Maybe. Cameron pushed off the doorframe, and for a second I thought he was going to step into the room, step closer to me, and my heart started doing something complicated and concerning. But he just nodded once and said, unpack, rest. Tomorrow the real work starts. Then he was gone, and I was alone in a strange room in a strange house with 2 strange men who somehow didn't feel like strangers at all. Dinner was an education in uncomfortable silence. The dining room was big enough to seat 12, but only 6 of us gathered around one end of the long table. Me, Cameron, Wyatt, and 3 ranch hands whose names I immediately forgot because I was too busy trying not to combust under the weight of everyone's stares. This is Eli, Wyatt announced, loading his plate with roast chicken and potatoes. He'll be working off his daddy's debt for the summer. Treat him good, boys, or answer to us. The ranch hands nodded. gave me weak smiles, went back to their food. They seemed nice enough, but there was a wariness in their eyes when they looked at the twins, and I filed that information away for later. Cameron sat at the head of the table with me on his right, and I was hyper-aware of every movement he made. The way he cut his food with precise motions, the way he'd pause occasionally to look at me like he was checking if I was real. Wyatt sat across from me and had no such restraint. He stared openly, smiled when I caught him at it, and generally made me feel like I was being studied for a science project. "So Eli," one of the ranch hands said, Marco, I think his name was, "you know anything about horses?" "A little," I admitted. "We had two back home, draft horses for the plow." Wyatt's eyebrows went up. "You can handle a plow horse?" "I can handle most things if you show me how." It came out more confident than I felt, but something in Wyatt's expression shifted, darkened, and Cameron's fork paused halfway to his mouth. The air got thick again, charged with something I didn't have a name for, and I suddenly wanted to take the words back, or say them again. I couldn't decide which. "Good to know," Cameron said softly, and the rumble in his voice did things to my nervous system that should probably be illegal. After dinner, I escaped to my room under the pretense of being tired from the day's events. Really, I just needed space to breathe, to think, to figure out what the hell was happening to me. I'd been at the ranch for less than 6 hours and already felt like I was drowning in something I didn't understand. I was unpacking the last of my clothes when a knock sounded at the door. "It's open," I called, expecting one of the ranch hands. It was Wyatt. He filled the doorway the same way Cameron had earlier, all broad shoulders and easy confidence, but where Cameron had kept his distance, Wyatt stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind him. My heart kicked into overdrive. "Something you need?" "Just checking on you," he said, moving to sit on the edge of my bed like he had every right to be there. "First night away from home can be rough." "I'm fine." "You're a terrible liar, Eli." He patted the space next to him. "Come sit, talk to me." I should have stayed by the dresser, should have kept the distance between us. Instead, I found myself crossing the room, sitting down beside him with barely 6 inches of space between our bodies. He was warm, they both ran hot, I'd noticed, and he smelled like soap and something darker. Wood smoke, maybe, or whiskey. "You scared?" Wyatt asked. "You keep asking me that," I said. "Different variations of the same question." "Because you keep not answering it." I thought about lying, about playing it cool, but something in Wyatt's face, an openness, a genuine curiosity made me want to be honest. "I'm terrified," I admitted. "Of you, of your brother, of this whole situation, but also," I paused, searching for words, "also not, which makes no sense." Wyatt smiled, and it transformed his face from intimidating to devastating. "It makes perfect sense to me, sweetheart. Fear and excitement live in the same neighborhood. Sometimes they're roommates." "Is that what you think I am? Excited?" "I think you're something," he said, and his hand came up to brush a strand of hair off my forehead. The touch was feather-light, lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it burned. "Haven't figured out what yet, but I will." He stood then, moved toward the door, and I felt the loss of his presence like a physical ache. At the threshold, he paused and looked back at me. "Sleep well, Eli. Tomorrow we'll see what you're really made of." Then he was gone, and I was left sitting on a bed that still held the ghost of his warmth, wondering what kind of deal I'd actually made. I learned quickly that the Nelson twins didn't believe in easing people into ranch work. At 5 in the morning, Cameron pounded on my door with all the subtlety of a battering ram, and 20 minutes later I was in the barn learning how to muck stalls while the sun was still a promise on the horizon. "You'll do the horses first," Cameron instructed, handing me a pitchfork that felt like it weighed 40 pounds. "Clean stalls, lay fresh hay, check their water. Wyatt will show you how to feed them after." "Where is Wyatt?" I asked, trying not to sound like I'd been wondering the same thing since I woke up. "Around," Cameron's mouth quirked. Why, you miss him already? I don't even know him. That's not an answer. He was right, and we both knew it, but I wasn't about to examine why I'd noticed Wyatt's absence like a missing tooth. Instead, I focused on the work, throwing myself into the physical labor with a determination that surprised even me. The truth was, I needed the distraction, needed to focus on something other than the way Cameron watched me, not constantly, not obviously, but in those stolen glances when he thought I wasn't paying attention. I'd catch him looking and he'd glance away, jaw tight, and something in my chest would squeeze. By noon, my arms were shaking and my back ached, and I'd worked up a sweat that had my shirt clinging to my skin. I was hauling a water bucket toward the far pasture when I finally saw Wyatt again. He was working with a horse in the round pen, a massive black stallion that looked mean enough to eat people. Wyatt stood in the center of the pen, shirtless, holding a long lead rope while the horse circled him at a canter. His skin gleamed with sweat, muscles moving under skin like water, and I stopped dead in my tracks because the sight of him hit me like a physical blow. Beautiful, isn't he? I spun around to find Cameron right behind me, close enough that I stumbled back a step. He steadied me with a hand on my elbow, and even through the fabric of my shirt, I felt that touch everywhere. The horse, Cameron clarified, amused. I was talking about the horse. Right, I managed. The horse very beautiful. Cameron's eyes narrowed slightly, and I had the terrible feeling he knew exactly what I'd been looking at. But instead of calling me out, he just said, Wyatt's good with difficult animals, has a way of gentling them without breaking their spirit. Is that what you do? I asked before I could stop myself. Break things. Something flickered across Cameron's face, anger maybe or hurt, and his hand tightened fractionally on my elbow before he let go. That what you think of us? That we break things? I think you take things, I said, and I heard the edge in my own voice. Farms, people, choices, you took me. You came willingly. I came because you didn't leave me any other option. We stared at each other and the air between us felt electric, dangerous. Cameron's eyes were storm dark and I could see a muscle jumping in his jaw. For a second, I thought he might yell at me or walk away or, God help me, step closer. He did none of those things. Instead, he said quietly, You're right, we didn't give you a choice. And I'm not going to apologize for that because your father made his debts and somebody had to pay them. But what happens next, Eli? The way we treat you, the way this summer goes. He paused and his eyes softened slightly. That's your choice. You want to hate us, fine. We can work with that, but if you want something else. What else is there? I whispered. Cameron smiled and it was almost sad. I guess we'll find out. That night at dinner, Wyatt was in high spirits, telling stories about the horses and teasing the ranch hands with an easy affection that made me realize these men weren't afraid of the twins. They respected them, maybe even liked them, which complicated everything I thought I knew. Eli did good work today, Cameron announced halfway through the meal. Got through the stalls faster than expected, didn't complain once. I complain on the inside, I said, and Wyatt laughed. Smart, he said, keep it bottled up, let it ferment, makes the eventual explosion more entertaining. Is that what you do? Sweetheart, I don't bottle up anything. Wyatt's grin was wicked. Ask Cameron, I'm an open book. More like an open wound, Cameron muttered, but there was fondness in his voice. I watched them interact, the way they moved around each other with the unspoken coordination of people who'd spent their whole lives together, the way Cameron would anticipate what Wyatt needed before he asked for it, the way Wyatt could make his brother smile with just a look. It was intimate in a way that made me feel like I was intruding on something private. After dinner, I tried to retreat to my room again, but Wyatt caught me on the stairs. Come have a drink with us, he said. We won't bite unless you ask nicely. Wyatt, Cameron warned from behind him, but there was no real heat in it. What? I'm being friendly. You're being you, which is different. against my better judgment. I let them lead me to a study on the first floor, all leather furniture and dark wood, and a fireplace that wasn't lit because summer nights were still warm. Cameron poured 3 glasses of whiskey, handed me one, and settled into an armchair while Wyatt sprawled on the couch and patted the cushion beside him. "I don't really drink," I admitted, staring at the amber liquid. "Then don't," Cameron said simply. "We're not trying to get you drunk, Eli. We're trying to get to know you." "Why?" The question hung in the air. Wyatt and Cameron exchanged a look, one of those silent twin conversations that seemed to involve entire paragraphs. Finally, Cameron said, "Because you're here for 3 months, seems like we should at least try to be civilized about it." I sat down next to Wyatt, keeping a careful distance between us, and took a tiny sip of the whiskey. It burned going down, but not unpleasantly. "Okay," I said. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," Wyatt said immediately. "Start with why a smart kid like you is still living on a failing farm instead of going to college or running off to the city like everyone else your age." "Who says I'm smart?" "Cameron did, earlier. Said you had sharp eyes and a sharper mouth." I looked at Cameron, who suddenly seemed very interested in his drink. "You said that." "I say a lot of things," he deflected. "Doesn't mean you need to hear all of them." But I wanted to hear them. Wanted to know what else Cameron had said about me, what he thought when he looked at me with those Creekwater eyes. Instead, I answered Wyatt's question. "I stayed because my dad needed me, because my mom died when I was 14 and he fell apart and somebody had to keep things running, and because—" I paused, surprised by my own honesty, "because I didn't know what else to do, where else to go." "You ever thought about it?" Cameron asked. "Leaving?" "Every single day." Something passed between us then, an understanding, maybe, or a recognition. Cameron looked at me like he knew exactly what I meant, like he'd thought about leaving too and hadn't been able to pull the trigger. "This ranch," Wyatt said, gesturing around us with his glass, "used to belong to our father. He was a son of a bitch who drank too much and hit too hard, and when he died 5 years ago, we inherited his debts along with his land. Took us 3 years to dig ourselves out. We know what it's like," Cameron added quietly, "to feel trapped by someone else's mistakes, to work yourself to the bone trying to fix something that might be too broken to save." I stared at them, these giant men who'd seemed so invincible, and saw the cracks in their armor, saw the exhaustion around Cameron's eyes, the tension in Wyatt's shoulders. They weren't villains. They were just people trying to survive, same as me. "I'm sorry," I said, "about your father." "Don't be," Wyatt said. "World's better without him." We talked for hours after that, about nothing and everything, about horses and crops and the way the sky looked different out here than anywhere else. Cameron told me about learning to run the ranch, about the first time he'd had to fire someone and how much it had gutted him. Wyatt told me about breaking his arm in 3 places when a horse threw him, about how Cameron had stayed in the hospital room for 2 straight days even though Wyatt kept telling him to go home. And slowly, drink by drink, story by story, I felt something shifting. The fear was still there, coiled tight in my chest, but it was sharing space now with something warmer, something dangerous. When I finally stood to leave, unsteady from the whiskey and the lateness and the emotional weight of the evening, Wyatt rose with me. "I'll walk you up," he said. "I can manage." "I'm sure you can, sweetheart, but I want to anyway." Cameron stayed in the study, watching us leave with an expression I couldn't read. At my bedroom door, Wyatt paused, standing close enough that I had to tilt my head back to look at him. "You did good today, Eli," he said softly. "With the work with us, with everything. You're stronger than you think." "I don't feel strong." "No one ever does." His hand came up, and I thought he was going to touch my face, but instead he just steadied himself against the doorframe. "Sleep well. Tomorrow we'll teach you to ride." "I know how to ride." "Not like we ride," he promised, and the heat in his voice made my mouth go dry. Then he was gone, and I was alone in my room with a racing heart and the distinct feeling that I was in way over my head. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of hard work and harder feelings. I learned to ride the Nelson way, which meant hours in the saddle until my thighs burned and Cameron's hands on my hips adjusting my position became the only thing I could think about. I learned to mend fences with Wyatt in the blazing sun, our shoulders brushing as we worked, his laugh loud and free when I managed to smash my thumb with a hammer. I learned the rhythms of the ranch, the language of the animals, the way the light changed throughout the day. And I learned Cameron and Wyatt in ways that felt far too intimate for people who were supposed to be my employers. I learned that Cameron woke at 4 every morning to check the property before anyone else stirred, that he drank his coffee black and took his responsibilities so seriously it sometimes bent him under the weight, that he smiled rarely but when he did, it was like the sun breaking through clouds. I learned that Wyatt was the opposite, all easy charm and quick laughter until you looked close and saw the sharp intelligence behind the playboy facade, that he read poetry late at night when he thought no one was watching, that he had nightmares sometimes, and Cameron would sit with him until they passed. And I learned that they were both watching me the same way I was watching them, with a hunger that had nothing to do with food, and everything to do with the tension that crackled between us like electricity before a storm. It came to a head on a Saturday night, 3 weeks into my sentence. The ranch hands had gone into town, leaving just the three of us at the house. Cameron cooked steaks on the grill while Wyatt and I set the table, and the whole scene felt domestic in a way that made my chest ache. "You're quiet tonight," Wyatt observed, opening beers for all of us. "Something on your mind?" Everything was on my mind. The way Cameron's arms looked when he flipped the steaks, the way Wyatt's knee kept bumping mine under the table, the fact that I was halfway through my summer sentence and the thought of leaving made me feel hollowed out. "Just tired," I lied. "You're a terrible liar," Cameron said from the grill, echoing his brother's words from weeks ago. "One of your better qualities, actually." "What are my other qualities?" I asked before I could stop myself. Cameron turned to look at me, and the intensity in his gaze nearly knocked me over. "You really want to know?" "Yes." He set down the tongs and walked toward me with slow, measured steps. My heart started hammering. Wyatt had gone very still beside me, and I could feel the attention of both men like spotlights. "You're brave," Cameron said, stopping close enough that I had to look up at him. "Braver than you give yourself credit for. You work harder than anyone I've ever seen, and you never complain even when I know you're hurting." He paused, and something in his expression softened. "You're kind, Eli, to the animals, to the ranch hands, to us even though you have every reason not to be. And you're beautiful." The last word landed like a bomb. I felt Wyatt's sharp inhale beside me, saw the way Cameron's jaw tightened like he'd said too much. "I'm not," I started, but Cameron cut me off. "Yes, you are, and I'm done pretending I don't see it." The air got thick, heavy with things unsaid. Wyatt stood up slowly, and now I was flanked by both of them, surrounded by their heat and their size and the terrible, wonderful weight of their attention. "This is a bad idea," I whispered, but I didn't move away. "Probably," Wyatt agreed, "but that's never stopped us before." "Eli," Cameron said, and my name in his voice was a prayer and a question. "Tell us to stop. Tell us this isn't what you want and we'll back off. We'll finish out the summer like professionals and never mention this again." "But if you want this too," Wyatt added, his breath warm against my ear, "if you feel even a fraction of what we feel, then say so. Because we're losing our minds here, sweetheart. Have been since the day we met you." I should have said stop. Should have protected myself, protected them, protected whatever fragile thing we'd built over the past 3 weeks. But when I opened my mouth, what came out was, "I can't stop thinking about you, either of you, both of you, and I don't know what that makes me." But I didn't get to finish because Cameron's hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb brushing my cheek, and the gentleness of it nearly broke me. "It makes you ours," he said roughly, "if you'll have us." "Both of us," Wyatt clarified. "We don't do anything halfway, Eli. It's all or nothing." My brain was shorting out trying to process what they were offering, trying to understand how I'd gone from captive to what? Lover, partner, something with no name because it was too big, too complicated, too impossible. "I don't understand," I admitted, "how this works, what you want from me." "Everything," Cameron said simply. "We want everything, Eli, but we'll start with this." And then he was kissing me, soft at first, testing, and then deeper when I made a sound that was probably embarrassing, but I couldn't bring myself to care. His mouth was warm and demanding and perfect, and when Wyatt's hands settled on my hips from behind, steadying me, I thought I might dissolve entirely. Cameron pulled back, breathing hard, and his eyes were wild. "Okay?" he asked. "More than okay," I managed. And then Wyatt was turning me, claiming his own kiss, different from Cameron's but equally devastating. He kissed like he did everything else, with enthusiasm and skill and just enough roughness to make my knees weak. When he let me go, I swayed between them, drunk on sensation and possibility and the sheer impossibility of the situation. They were both breathing hard, looking at me like I was precious and fragile, and also like they wanted to devour me whole. "The stakes are burning," I said faintly. Wyatt laughed, the sound bright and free. "Fuck the stakes." But Cameron was already moving toward the grill, and I saw his hands shake as he rescued our dinner. The vulnerability of it, the evidence that he was just as wrecked as I was, made something in my chest crack open. We ate dinner in a daze, the three of us exchanging loaded glances and small touches, fingers brushing when passing the salt, knees bumping under the table, the kind of casual intimacy that felt anything but casual. And after, when the dishes were done and the night stretched ahead of us full of possibility and terror, Cameron took my hand. "Come upstairs with us," he said, "not a demand, an invitation." I looked between them. These impossible men who'd crashed into my life and turned everything upside down, and made the easiest, most terrifying decision of my life. "Okay," I said, "yes." What happened next was theirs. The way Cameron undressed me like I was something precious. The way Wyatt whispered praise against my skin. The way they moved around me with me, together in a dance they seemed to have choreographed without words. It was overwhelming and perfect, and when it was over, when we lay tangled together in Cameron's massive bed, sweaty and satisfied, and somehow more complete than I'd ever felt, I knew with absolute certainty that I was in trouble. Because in 6 weeks my sentence would be up, the debt would be paid, and I'd have to decide whether to leave or stay, knowing that staying meant choosing this impossible thing, and leaving meant tearing out a piece of my soul. But for tonight, with Cameron's arm around my waist and Wyatt's breath soft against my neck, I let myself pretend that the choice would be an easy one. I let myself pretend that love was ever simple. And I let myself fall asleep in their arms, surrounded by their warmth, already dreading the morning. I woke alone. Sunlight streamed through Cameron's bedroom window, and when I reached across the sheets, they were cold. My heart sank with a speed that proved exactly how screwed I was. Downstairs, I found Cameron at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a ledger, looking every inch the stern rancher who'd collected me from my father's property. He glanced up when I entered, and for a horrible second I thought last night had been a mistake, that he regretted it, that I'd misread everything. Then his expression softened. "Morning," he said quietly. "There's coffee." "Where's Wyatt?" I asked, pouring myself a cup I didn't really want just to have something to do with my hands. "Morning chores. He'll be back for breakfast." Silence stretched between us, awkward and heavy. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Cameron, about last night." "Was perfect," he interrupted, closing the ledger, "and also complicated." My stomach dropped. Complicated how? He stood, moved toward me, and his hand came up to cup my face with the same gentleness he'd shown last night. "Because in 6 weeks you're free to go, and Wyatt and I," he paused, struggling with the words. "We can't be what holds you here, Eli. Can't be another debt keeping you trapped." "What if I don't feel trapped?" "You say that now," he said, and there was something sad in his eyes. "But what about in 6 months? A year? When you're still stuck on this ranch because you think you owe us something, or because you're afraid of disappointing us, or because I love you." The words were out before I could stop them, hanging in the air like smoke. "Is that what you're afraid of, Cameron? That I might actually feel something real?" His breath caught. "You can't know that, not after 3 weeks. And you said you'd been losing your mind since the day you met me," I challenged. "Was that a lie?" "No," he said roughly. "God, no, but that's different. I'm we're." "What? Older, more experienced, less capable of making stupid decisions based on feelings." I set down my coffee with more force than necessary. "You don't get to decide what I feel, Cameron. You don't get to protect me from my own choices." "Someone has to," he said, and the raw honesty in his voice gutted me. "Because I'm sure as hell not strong enough to walk away from you, Eli, and neither is Wyatt. So if this is going to end, if you're going to leave, it needs to be your decision, not ours." Before I could respond, the kitchen door banged open and Wyatt walked in, covered in dust and grinning like he didn't have a care in the world. Then he saw our faces, and his smile faltered. "What I miss?" he asked carefully. "Cameron thinks I'm going to leave in 6 weeks and break both your hearts," I said, still staring at Cameron. "He's trying to noble sacrifice himself before that happens." "Jesus, Cam," Wyatt sighed. "We talked about this." "Talked about what?" I demanded. Wyatt crossed the kitchen and pulled me against his chest, and I went willingly because I was starting to understand that Wyatt's affection was as steady as gravity. "We talked about not sabotaging this before it even gets a chance to grow," he said into my hair. "About trusting you to know your own mind." "I do trust him," Cameron protested. "I just—" "You're scared," I said, understanding dawning. "You're scared I'll leave, so you're trying to push me away first, make it hurt less." The look on Cameron's face confirmed I'd hit the mark. He turned away, bracing his hands on the counter, and I saw the tension in every line of his body. "My father left," he said finally. "Not physically, but emotionally, mentally. He checked out years before he died. And we stayed because this was our home and we didn't know where else to go, and every day was just enduring, surviving. I won't do that to you, Eli. Won't make you stay somewhere that makes you unhappy." My heart cracked open. I pulled away from Wyatt and crossed to Cameron, wrapping my arms around him from behind. He stiffened, then relaxed, and I felt the shudder that went through him. "I'm not unhappy," I said against his shoulder blade. "I'm terrified and confused and in way over my head, but I'm not unhappy. And maybe I will leave in 6 weeks. Maybe I'll decide this is too complicated or too intense or too everything. But maybe I won't. Maybe I'll stay and we'll figure this out together. Isn't that worth the risk?" Cameron turned in my arms and his eyes were suspiciously bright. "You're 20 years old, Eli. You should be out discovering the world, not tied down to a ranch and two fucked up men who don't know how to do this any more than you do." "Maybe I want to be tied down," I said. "Maybe discovering the world doesn't mean leaving. Maybe it means learning who I am when I'm not running from my father's mistakes or trying to save something that can't be saved. Maybe it means finding people who see me and want me anyway." "We see you," Wyatt said from behind me. "We want you, that's never been in question." "Then stop trying to make my choices for me," I said to Cameron. "Stop protecting me from things that haven't happened yet. If I leave, it'll be because I want to, not because you push me away to save yourself from getting hurt." Cameron stared at me for a long moment, and I watched something shift in his expression, from fear to hope to resignation to something that looked almost like joy. "You're going to wreck us," he said softly. "Completely destroy us." "Good," I said. Maybe you need to be wrecked." "Maybe we do," Wyatt agreed. And then he was there too, arms around both of us. And we stood in the kitchen like that, tangled together, holding each other up. While the sun climbed higher and the ranch woke up around us, and something fragile and perfect took root. The next few weeks were an education in how three people could navigate loving each other without a roadmap. There were rough patches, jealous moments when I'd see one of them getting more attention than the other and feel irrationally hurt, even though I knew it wasn't a competition. Awkward conversations about boundaries and expectations and what the hell we were even doing. But there were also perfect moments. Cameron teaching me to read ledgers by lamplight, his patience infinite even when I struggled with the numbers. Wyatt braiding my hair one evening while we watched the sunset, his fingers gentle and sure. The three of us working side by side during the day, moving around each other with increasing synchronicity. The ranch hands noticed, of course, but if they had opinions, they kept them to themselves. Marco pulled me aside once, asked if I was okay if I needed help. When I assured him I was more than okay, he just nodded and said, "Good. Those boys deserve someone who sees them the way you do." My father called twice. The first time I told him I was fine, the work was hard but manageable, I'd be home in a few weeks. The second time, 3 days before my sentence was up, I told him I might not be coming home at all. The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, he said, "Is it because of them, the Nelson twins?" "It's because of me," I corrected. "Because I'm figuring out who I am when I'm not trying to fix your mistakes, and that person might not want to come back to a farm that's drowning and a father who's given up." "Eli, I never meant." "I know," I said, and I was surprised to find I meant it. "But intent doesn't matter as much as impact. I love you, Dad, but I can't save you. You have to do that yourself." When I hung up, I found Cameron in the doorway of the study. "That sounded hard," he said. "It was necessary," I replied. "He needs to stand on his own, and I need to figure out what I want without guilt making the decision for me." "And what do you want?" Cameron asked, even though I could see in his eyes that he was afraid of the answer. I stood cross to him and took his hands in mine. "I want to stay," I said simply. "Not because of the debt, not because I'm afraid to leave, but because this place, these people, you and Wyatt, they feel like home in a way nothing else ever has." Cameron's exhale was shaky with relief. "You're sure? Because once you decide to stay, I'm not letting you go easy, Eli. Neither is Wyatt." "I don't want easy," I said. "I want real, and this is the realest thing I've ever felt." The night before my sentence officially ended, they threw a small celebration. Just the ranch hands, a bonfire, some beers. Everyone knew by then that I wasn't leaving, but they toasted my freedom anyway with good-natured ribbing about how I'd chosen to stay enslaved. "Some chains," Marco said with a knowing grin, "are worth wearing." Wyatt threw a beer cap at him, and Cameron's hand found mine in the firelight, and I thought about how drastically my life had changed in 3 months. How I'd come here afraid and angry and lost, and found myself in the process. Later, after everyone had drifted off to bed, the three of us sat by the dying fire. Wyatt had his head in my lap, and I played with his hair while Cameron stoked the embers. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. "We can't exactly advertise this arrangement." "We don't have to," Cameron said. "People can think what they want, but we know what we are." "And what's that?" He looked at me over the fire, and the love in his eyes was enough to stop my heart. "A family," he said. "Unconventional, maybe, but family all the same." "Family," Wyatt agreed sleepily. "Finally." And as I sat there between them, these impossible men who'd taken me captive and somehow set me free, I realized that sometimes the best choices are the ones that don't make sense to anyone but you. Sometimes freedom isn't about leaving. It's about staying by choice instead of obligation. In the months that followed, we settled into a rhythm that felt both ordinary and extraordinary. The ranch thrived under our combined care. My father sold his farm, got a decent price for it, too, and moved into town where he found work at the feed store and started attending AA meetings. We talked once a week, slowly rebuilding a relationship that had been strained for years. Cameron taught me everything he knew about running the business side of the ranch. Wyatt taught me to gentle horses the way he did, with patience and understanding instead of force. And I taught them both that love didn't have to look like anything except what it was: three people choosing each other every single day. There were hard moments, whispers in town when people figured out the three of us were living together, a few awkward conversations with distant family members who didn't understand. But for every challenge, there were a dozen perfect moments that made it worthwhile. On the 1-year anniversary of the day I arrived at the ranch, I woke up in their bed, our bed, to find them both already awake, watching me. "What?" I asked, self-conscious. "Just remembering," Cameron said, "how scared you looked that first day, how small you seemed standing between us." "I'm still small compared to you," I pointed out. "But not scared anymore," Wyatt observed. "Not of us anyway." "No," I agreed. "Not scared, grateful maybe, happy definitely." "We're the grateful ones," Cameron said, pulling me closer. "You saved us, Eli, in all the ways that mattered." "I didn't save anyone," I protested. "I just—" "Loved us," Wyatt finished. "When we didn't think we deserved it, when it would have been easier to hate us. You chose us, sweetheart. That's a kind of salvation all its own." I looked between them, these men who'd started as captors and become my partners, my lovers, my home, and felt the weight of how far we'd all come. From debts and demands and desperation to this, a love that was messy and unconventional and absolutely perfect. "So what now?" I asked, echoing my question from a year ago. Cameron smiled. "Now we keep going, keep choosing each other, keep building something that's ours and no one else's." "Together," Wyatt added. "Together," I agreed, and sealed it with a kiss that tasted like coffee and promise and forever. Because sometimes the best stories don't end with someone riding off into the sunset. Sometimes they end with three people standing in the sunrise, watching a new day break over land they've tended with their own hands, surrounded by animals they've gentled, building a life that no one else could have imagined. Sometimes freedom looks like chains you choose to wear, and sometimes love looks like two giant cowboys and the farmer's son who taught them that being taken could be the same thing as being found. If you want to know what happens next, if you want to hear about the day Wyatt broke his wrist again and I had to play nurse, or the time Cameron and I had our first real fight, or how we eventually expanded the ranch and hired more hands and built something even bigger than what we started with, then let me know. Hit that subscribe button, drop a like, leave a comment telling me if you think we made the right choice. Because this story, it's just beginning. And I can't wait to see where it goes next.